Why did you buy that specific brand of coffee this morning? Was it really the best one, or just the one next to the super expensive one? Why do you feel worse about losing $20 than you feel good about finding $20? And why are you more likely to buy ground beef that's labeled 80% lean than one that says 20% fat? You probably think you're in complete control of your decisions, that you're a logical person making rational choices about your money and your life. Well, what if I told you that's a lie we all tell ourselves? Your brain has a series of hidden glitches, subconscious biases that marketers, politicians, and big companies exploit every single day. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's a science called behavioral economics. And today, we're going to decode the secret language of your own mind. We'll uncover the invisible strings that guide your choices, from what you buy to how you vote. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll see the world and yourself in a completely different way. For a long time, economists had this really neat and tidy idea of you. They called you Homo economicus, or the rational man. This dude was basically a superhero of logic. He had perfect self-control, he was never emotional, and he always made the choice that would give him the most benefit. He'd be the guy to calculate the exact nutritional value per dollar of every item in the grocery store. Sounds exhausting, right? Well, here's the big secret. The thing that turns modern economics on its head: Homo economicus doesn't exist. He's a myth, a fairy tale. So, if we're not perfectly rational, what are we? That's the billion-dollar question that two psychologists, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, started asking back in the 70s. These guys weren't even economists, but they ended up winning a Nobel Prize in economics for their work. Why? Because they proved that not only are we irrational, but we are predictably irrational. That's the key. Our mistakes, our weird choices, our mental glitches, they follow patterns. And once you see the patterns, you can't unsee them. It's like seeing the code in the Matrix. Behavioral economics is basically the love child of psychology and economics. It's the field that says, hey, let's study how real, messy, emotional, coffee-loving, sometimes lazy humans actually behave. And what they found is that our brains, in an effort to be efficient, have created a bunch of mental shortcuts. Think of them as the brain's autopilot mode. Most of the time, they're super helpful. They stop you from having to spend 20 minutes deciding which socks to wear. But sometimes these shortcuts lead us down some very strange paths, especially when it comes to money. These shortcuts are called cognitive biases, and they are the invisible puppeteers pulling the strings on your everyday life. We're about to expose 3 of the most powerful ones, the ones that companies are spending billions to use against you. But before we dive into how you're being manipulated, I just want to ask for a little help. This channel is all about decoding the hidden forces that shape our world, from psychology to history to science. We don't have a big corporate budget, we just have a passion for this stuff. So if you find this interesting, if you want to understand the why behind things, please hit that subscribe button. It's free, and it literally is the only way we can keep making these videos for you. Thanks a bunch. Now, let's unmask that first puppeteer. Okay, so let's start with a bias that almost everyone has fallen for. It's called the anchoring effect. Imagine you walk into a store and see a new smartphone. There are 2 models. One is $300. The other, with a slightly bigger screen, is $1,000. Suddenly, that $300 phone looks like an incredible bargain, right?
Now, what if the other phone was only $400? The $300 one doesn't seem quite as cheap anymore, does it? Nothing about the $300 phone changed. Only the context changed. The first price you saw, that big $1,000 tag, acted as an anchor. Your brain latched onto that initial piece of information and used it as a reference point for every other decision that followed. There it is. The first number you see changes your perception of value. This is why stores will show a ridiculously high original price right next to the sale price. The $500 sweater might still be overpriced at $200, but it feels like a steal because your brain is anchored to $500. It's a trick, and it works almost every time. But where else does this show up? Oh, everywhere. When you're buying a house, the listing price is an anchor. When you're negotiating a salary, the first number mentioned sets the anchor for the rest of the conversation. Even restaurant menus do this. They'll put a super expensive steak at the top of the menu, not because they expect to sell a lot of them, but to make the $40 salmon look reasonable by comparison. They've anchored you high. So our brains get stuck on the first thing we see. Weird, but manageable. But what about how we handle risk and reward? You'd think that gaining $100 would feel just as good as losing $100 feels bad, right? A perfect balance. Well, your brain has a very strong opinion on that, and it's not balanced at all. This brings us to our second and maybe more powerful puppeteer, loss aversion. Let me ask you this. What would have a bigger impact on your day? Finding a surprise $100 bill on the ground? Or realizing you lost a $100 bill that was in your pocket? For almost everyone, the pain of the loss is way, way more intense than the joy of the gain. And scientists have actually measured this. The research by Kahneman and Trisky suggests that the psychological pain of losing is about twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining. We are fundamentally wired to avoid losses more than we are to seek gains. But why? Think about our ancestors on the savannah. Finding an extra bunch of berries was great, and they spone us. But losing your only source of food for the day, that could be a disaster. That could mean death. Our brains evolved in a world where avoiding loss was critical for survival. We're still running that ancient software. This single bias explains so much weird financial behavior. It's why people will refuse to sell a stock that's lost money, holding on in the desperate hope it will recover. Selling it would mean realizing the loss, which is psychologically painful. It's also the magic behind free trial offers. Once you have that streaming service or software, it becomes yours to lose. The thought of losing access after 30 days triggers loss aversion, making you much more likely to pay up. Okay, so our brains get anchored by numbers and we're terrified of losing things. But the third bias is the most subtle, the most insidious of them all. What if I told you the way a choice is described can completely reverse your decision, even when the facts are identical?
This is the master of manipulation, the framing effect. Let's say a doctor is presenting a risky surgery. In scenario A, the doctor says, "This procedure has a 90% survival rate." In scenario B, the doctor says, "This procedure has a 10% mortality rate." Which one sounds better? Overwhelmingly, people feel more confident choosing scenario A, but they're the exact same statistic. All that changed was the frame. Survival rate frames it as a gain. Mortality rate frames it as a loss. And because of loss aversion, we run away from the negatively framed option. This is everywhere. When you buy ground beef, 80% lean sounds way healthier and more appealing than 20% fat. When a company has layoffs, they call it restructuring or right-sizing. Politicians talk about a tax relief, a gain, instead of a spending cut, a loss. The language used to frame the issue changes our entire perception of it. And here's the scary part.
These biases don't just work in isolation. They team up. Imagine a limited time offer, creating scarcity and loss aversion for a product with a slashed price from a ridiculously high original price, which is framed as saving 70% instead of paying 30%. That's a triple whammy your brain has almost no defense against. So at this point, you might be feeling a little helpless, like you're just a puppet whose strings are being pulled by your own flawed brain. It can feel a bit grim, I get it. Marketers are using these tricks, politicians are using them, everyone seems to be exploiting these glitches in our mental software. But here is the single most important takeaway from all of this. This is the whole point. Knowing that the game is rigged is the first step to winning it. You can't just turn these biases off. They're hardwired. They're a fundamental part of being human. But you can learn to recognize them. You can install a sort of mental firewall that flags these situations and lets you switch from autopilot to manual control. You can use the knowledge of these biases to make better decisions. You can, in effect, hack your own brain. So, how do you do it? Let's get practical. When you feel the pull of an anchor, like a high original price, pause. Force yourself to ignore that number. Ask a different question. Setting that aside, what is this product or service actually worth to me right now? You have to consciously set your own anchor based on real value, not their inflated one. When you feel the sting of loss aversion, maybe you're holding on to a bad investment, a failing project, or even a toxic relationship because you've already put so much into it, reframe the situation. Ask yourself the magic question. If I weren't already in this situation, would I choose to enter it today? If the answer is no, you know that loss aversion is clouding your judgment. And when you're faced with the framing effect, always try to flip the frame. If a product boasts a 99% success rate, think about the 1% who fail. If a politician offers tax relief, ask who will be affected by the corresponding budget cuts. Seeing the choice from both the positive and negative perspectives reveals the full picture, not just the one they want you to see. This isn't just about avoiding a bad deal on a TV. This is about the big stuff. It's about making smarter choices with your health, your career, and your finances. It's about seeing past the manipulative language in the news and making more informed decisions about the world we live in. The goal of behavioral economics isn't to make us into those mythical, perfectly rational robots. The goal is to help us become more thoughtful, more aware, and ultimately wiser humans. By understanding our predictable irrationality, we can build a world that's designed for how people actually are, not how economists in a textbook think we should be. We can forgive ourselves for our mental glitches and start building systems to protect us from them. That's a pretty hopeful thought, isn't it? So, which of these biases do you see affecting your life the most? Is it the anchoring of prices, the fear of loss, or the framing of news headlines? Let me know your story down in the comments. I'd genuinely love to read them. And hey, if you feel like your brain just got a little bit of an upgrade, do me a huge favor and hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden codes that run our lives. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.